In this Native women's discussion, I would like to talk about matrilineal positions as they might appear in our own families and how they have influenced our lives as we talk about our professional work. You know, who are the influential women in your life? How did you find yourself in your current line of work, and what are you working on right now?
I was blessed to be raised by my grandmother and her sisters. And so I was raised by this cadre of 4 older women, and that was wonderful because they certainly gave me a strong grounding in who I was and in a value system that had been part of our family for untold generations. So, and almost everyone else in my field went into something medical. I didn't see myself doing that. So enjoyed school, enjoyed reading, and it just seemed like a natural thing for me to do, and just kind of fell into it. I've been writing stories since I was about 3, actually, which is sort of weird but true. So came about this through that, and I didn't like teaching junior high, which I did first, and so I decided that teaching at the university level was much better than teaching 12-year-olds.
I had a quippy comment, I'll keep it to myself. I think everyone will probably say, Grandma was probably influential, my mom. But I think also for me, I have a lot of Native women who are professionals, and they have a huge influence on my life. They've had a huge influence, they continue to have a huge influence, really kind of a circle of sisters, and particularly sister scholars that play a huge part in my life. And I think when I came to college, I met a Native woman, a Comanche woman, who was a professor here, also a Kiowa man who was a professor who became very influential in my lives and in my life, and I think that's probably what propelled me in the direction that I went. They both came out of education, and Ed really essentially told me I was going to get my PhD, so I didn't have a choice. They just said, it's time, you're going to do it, and so I did. But they had a huge impact on my life as Native professors at the university, and really influenced the direction that I took. So, I've noticed this really kind of strong network of Native women, Native professionals, scholars, attorneys, doctors, leaders, and how our women have really kind of emerged as leaders. So one of the things that I'm working on with a colleague, Dr. Robin Minthorn, who's at the University of New Mexico, is we're currently doing a project looking at the experiences of Native women in leadership. And so it's been really interesting so far.
When I was a little girl, it was right around the time that Wilma Mankiller was becoming chief of the Cherokee Nation, the first female principal chief of the Cherokee Nation. And I'm a Cherokee citizen, and I can remember whenever Wilma was campaigning and getting ready for the election that I overheard my grandfather and his brother having a conversation with each other about whether or not Wilma should be chief, because Wilma was a woman, and we just hadn't had female chiefs before. And I can remember that making a huge impact on me as a little girl, sitting there and listening to these two Cherokee men talk about whether a Cherokee woman could be the leader of our tribe. And it just made such an impact. I recall after she had been chief for a little while, the community started seeing all the great things that she was doing, and anyone who was a naysayer in the beginning certainly changed their mind pretty quickly. And I just remember being really inspired by that as a young girl, thinking, if Wilma can do it, maybe some of the rest of us can as well. And that was something that made an impact on me early on. But like Dr. Shotton says, I mean, I've gotten the very, very fortunate experience of working with a number of very strong Native women, very strong Cherokee women who've worked alongside of me on really important issues. I've seen us make an impact together, and I feel really, really lucky to have had that experience. And whenever you go to the high-powered meetings and sit around a table, you look around and it's all women, right? It's all women. You see very few men, and so you really do see a big change in that, as opposed to 20 or 30 years ago. The decision makers, the policy makers, the advocates, the lawyers, the teachers, the doctors, they're women. So it's definitely a change that I think is different from the non-Indian spectrum of leadership, but it's very inherent in our communities, and it just fits, it just makes sense. So I'm glad to see it coming out.
That's funny that we have grandmothers and then women, first women leaders, because my great-grandmother, who was the first woman chairperson of the Kickapoo tribe of Oklahoma, and the only positive influence I had growing up, because like many many Native families, we have challenges and crisis and generational cultural traumas that we deal with on a daily basis. And my great-grandmother was, you know, the first woman chief of the Kickapoo in Oklahoma, and she was such an inspiration to me, not just because she was a leader, but because she would, you know, take those times to spend and tell me and stories of what makes me who I am, and that it's okay that I'm mixed and that I don't look like the other children in the community, and it made me feel good about who I was in my skin. And beyond that would be Haskell, going to a tribal college and being taught by Native scholars and academics that I can see myself in those kind of roles and positions, because I really hadn't had that much of that opportunity to be exposed to strong leaders, Native leaders, until I got to Haskell. And so Dan Wildcat was a huge influence on me to be in the environments. And of course, Winona LaDuke is my shero, and Dr. Henrietta Mann, who are both very inspirational, strong women that encourage us to be empowered in who we are as women, and as Native women especially.
You know, it's interesting, you and Heather both kind of brought this up too. It interests me too how the previous generation of Native men in academia really pushed this generation of Native women to succeed. I mean, because I know you're talking about Dr. Jerry Brett, right? Telling you this. I was also told I was going to get my PhD by Lee Francis, who was friends with one of my relatives, Dan Littlefield, Dr. Dan Littlefield, and he and Steve Russell and Vine Deloria and that generation of Native male scholars, and I think about Dan pushing you, how much they pushed us we should be done already. When we started these degrees, we were supposed to be done with these degrees the week we, started them. And really we're anxious for this generation of Native women to get pushed out into academia and into the world and to start making some changes and having that impact.
Well, I think we're the ones that will nurture the spaces for the upcoming students to have in those multidisciplines that have been so cold and closed prior. I mean, we are that generation that will fight a little harder. Native women are to be reckoned with. We will create space for our children, and all Native students. We're all connected. They are our children.
Well, Doe, for that discussion about Native women in our lives.